Britain's prison service is in crisis. This week's three-day rooftop demonstration at Frankland Prison is the most recent in a long list. Wandsworth, Havering, Lindholm are all proof of the strain on prisoners and prison officers alike. Tonight's Dispatch records a unique event inside Long Lartin, the top security prison whose inmates include 2 of the Birmingham 6. Do they feel any remorse? The answers can be heard in Voices from Long Lartin.
Long Lartin Prison near Evesham. It takes long-term prisoners, 72 Category A and 340 less dangerous Category B men. Many inmates think Long Lartin is a good prison. It isn't overcrowded or brutal. But even here the stress is on security, not rehabilitation. Inmates know that 60% of all prisoners reoffend. They accept that many prisons are far worse, but feel there is little incentive to reform, even though Long Lartin has some basic facilities. Every inmate has a cell of his own.
When you move in, you have a bed, table, chair, locker. That's it. Then you make of it whatever you can make of it, which is one good thing. At least you're allowed to do things with your cell. In most prisons, you can get nicked just for hanging a picture on the wall. The problem is that the public think that we live in luxury. At the end of the day, this is just a 7-foot by 8-foot concrete box. It's nothing more.
The corridors are full of personal belongings. Despite a few reminders of home, inmates miss much.
Well, you miss relationships with people, just being allowed to do the things that you want to do within reason. Simple things like just taking a walk whenever you feel like it, without people watching all the time.
Prison is my world and it's their world. And eventually we come to an accommodation with each other. They have to realise that I have to control the institution. I also have to realise that they've got to live in that institution. And in the end, at the end of the day, we've both got to live together. There is a degree of ambiguity in it. There is the problem of, at one extreme, maintaining the high level of security, but at the other, maintaining a very high level of humanity as well.
In here, you've got no privacy. In here, everything is dictated by the system. In here, you're just a number. You don't feel like a person in here. Outside bears no relation at all to life inside prison. People can't understand unless they're doing time. It's as simple as that. People can come into prison, they can look around it, but they know that they're going to walk out the gate again. It's different for prisoners. We don't get any days off.
The mix of prisoners, murderers, robbers, rapists, terrorists, adds to the stress. So does the bitterness of those who insist on their innocence, like 2 of the Birmingham 6.
It's very, very, very hard when you're in prison for something you haven't done. And also, when you wake up each morning and you say to yourself, well, what am I doing in here? But if you were to think about it all the time, it just drives you around the twist. You know what I mean? So you got to do things. No matter what it is, John goes to the gym, I do exceptional writing, I'm writing a book. More so when you're an innocent person, because even the guys that is convicted prisoners and have done the crime, they find it hard enough to do it. And they sometimes come to us and say, how in the name of God do these 2 guys do it?
I lost my home in Birmingham, and my wife and my children had to flee the country, go and live in Ireland. Ireland to her is a foreign country. She'd never been in Ireland in her life before. So I get visits from my wife, say, twice a year. When I came into prison first, my youngest girl was 1 year old. Now she's 16 years old. I never seen that girl growing up. I didn't see none of my children growing up.
Security in all prisons was tightened last year after the dramatic escape by helicopter from Gartree Prison. Prisoners at Long Lartin resent paying for this escape. Anti-helicopter devices were installed, and the exercise area cut to a small space which could be protected from the air.
Gartree didn't do us a lot of good, and both myself and many of the inmates and the staff here wondered whether we would lose a great deal of our ethos, if you like. And for a period of time we were on not terribly good ground.
You mean not terribly good terms with the inmates?
No, we maintained that and were able to persuade the inmates that we would use the extra security devices that we have with a minimum of petty restrictions.
We were unhappy about it because before we could exercise out on an open yard, now we exercise in a cage. We've lost about 2/3 of the playing field and we're just caged in all the time. So now there's no sense of freedom in here whatsoever.
Despite extra restrictions, the prison authorities see the need to make prisons less isolated. John Bowden, an inmate at Long Lartin, was convicted of a cruel murder. Yet he persuaded the prison governor to let him convene a unique forum where prisoners could speak out. On March 1st, 60 inmates made their way to the chapel. For the others, it was work as usual. Contradictions ruled. Prison routine remained sacrosanct, even though it was a big day when inmates could for once voice many of their concerns. At 9 o'clock in the chapel, prisoners, prison staff, police, pressure groups and ex-convicts gathered. Many inmates came with prepared speeches and questions. The day-long forum had one absentee, John Bowden himself, who had been transferred out of Long Lartin 4 weeks earlier as a punishment. For prisoners, the key topics were prison discipline, too many rules, too few rights, and dispersal to jails far from their homes. Inmates had to wait for guest speakers to argue both that the system had to give prisoners more rights and that they also had to take more responsibility.
Reform is the other key word as far as today's proceedings are concerned. How may it be achieved? Which aspects of the system should be reformed? And who are to be the ultimate beneficiaries of any such reform as may be achieved?
The governor interrupted the proceedings the moment he noticed the placard.
Will be a little easier to visualize.
Excuse me, could I just stop? Do you mind taking that down, please?
What up on you, mate?
Didn't even see it. The first speaker today is Stephen Shaw, who is the director of the Prison Reform Trust, and presumably his address will be on the subject of reform. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you very much. It is obviously not every day that I receive a letter from a prisoner in one of our long-term maximum security institutions inviting me to take part in what that prisoner, John Bowden, rightly described as a unique discussion about the prison system. It must be said it's not every day that the Home Office agrees to such a debate taking place. On the other hand, we've also discovered that this is not a free debate. The prisoners' rights movement, PROP, has been banned from taking part. Now, I think those two things illustrate the limits of openness and reconstruction, glasnost and perestroika within the penal system. Prisoners cannot expect to exert the influence they may wish to if they are divided amongst themselves. There are now 2,000 prisoners in the prison system on Rule 43 because they are not safe from other prisoners. That number of people in segregation for their own protection has trebled, increased by a factor of 3 during the 1980s. Governors say to me that they're not going to take that much account of prisoners going on about their rights when they know, frankly, how little regard many prisoners pay to the rights of some of their fellows.
Stephen Shaw ended by calling for a prison ombudsman to investigate prisoners' complaints. He was supported by Joe Sim, a sociologist from Liverpool.
It seems to me that the prison system has to be much more accountable. I think there should be a strict introduction of rules and regulations laid down within the prisons themselves in terms of internal accountability, so that prisoners know exactly what they're allowed, what they're due, what the prison officers can and cannot do, and removing a whole range of discretionary powers which prison officers, prison managers have at the moment.
Men inside have never before heard former prisoner Jimmy Boyle explain how the Barlinnie Special Unit changed him. The inmates were eager to learn how the most dangerous man in Scotland had gone straight. In Scotland, Boyle is banned from visiting prison as if the authorities dislike his success.
For the age of 11 to 38, I had 12 and a half months outside. It was a revolving door syndrome that I felt myself caught up in. Felt frustrated, angry, felt there was no way I could really get out of that. But now, there is a tremendous anger, embarrassment and humiliation about the part we do, prisoners play, in sustaining a system which is full of parasites that want to tell you what is the best way forward and what is best for you. Because that's what they are, parasites. They live off the back of you. And so the lesson for every prisoner is to try and stop that cycle. I tried to do that with some other prisoners when we were in prison. We've done it through violence, violence against prison officers, nonsense, beating the shit out of them, getting on and doing everything like that we did, but we were fulfilling everybody's fantasy. We were perpetuating the parasites. The magic thing about this special unit was that they provided a forum for prison officers and prisoners to sit down and discuss and debate. The situation allowed us, the prisoners, to empower ourselves and to make choices and to take it on. And what happened in that system is the contradictions of the pettiness of prison and the seriousness of it. And it was coming up against the cultures that I'd lived with, the black and white culture in my existence before that, which was perpetuating the whole vicious cycle of prisons, security, punishment, pain, and we had to try and break that. And breaking it was about suddenly learning about choices. I had to say to myself, I've got choices here. So the revolution really starts with ourselves. No playing the game, taking hard choices, and we've got to say one thing, that we don't want a violent world. And violence means ourselves. First and foremost, it's got to come for ourselves. Thanks very much.
Most of us prisoners know a lot about the Barlinnie unit and how successful it was as a place where you could change your whole attitudes. Isn't it true that the unit faced extreme difficulties from the majority of the POA involved in the Scottish prison system?
Prison staff developed in there. Staff started to open themselves up and do things which were quite imaginative and unthinkable, you know, degrees, doing all sorts of things. So they developed as well. It was very much a two-way process. But the interesting thing was that we built this forum between us and a relationship between us. And we then had the department coming down and trying to impose their sort of bureaucracy. And instead of just the prisoners doing it, you had the collective voice of prisoners and prison staff saying, hold it a minute, what's going on here? What are you doing? And in the past, that would be resolved by locking the prisoners up, but they couldn't have locked the staff up.
From that, obviously you say it worked, the unit. What we're worried about, most of the prisoners, is, in a way, this prison works like that. There's a relationship between the staff and prisoners in this prison that is unique in the prison system. I'm talking about the dispersal system. Right. And subsequently, since this prison has been going, there's been no crisis of control in this prison. In other words, there's been no tear-ups, no bad assaults on screws, etc., etc. Now, the Home Office knows that works. It knows Albany doesn't work. It knows Wakefield doesn't work. It knows Franklin doesn't work. All them, but it knows this works. Why does it perpetuate those systems when it knows this works? Why doesn't it change those systems are the same as this?
Crucial question, that. Absolutely crucial question. I'm not sure completely the answer to that myself, because there's exactly the same parallel in Scotland, in the sense that the Barlinnie unit is now regarded as simply one of a number of units up there that the Scottish office are now talking about building maximum security units. And in that sense, they knew it worked, where you took prisoners who are introverted, you know, have been brutalised by the system in there, who can't speak, can't articulate, and changed them. Unbelievably, the most dangerous man in Scotland, the most violent prisoner in Scotland, changed them, right? A system that worked. Now, the Scottish office, I think, under pressure from the SPOA, the Scottish Prison Officers Association, and also, you know, to be fair as well, a kind of culture which says we've got to punish. And while you have these places that do appear to work, the overwhelming thrust of the system is towards control.
I also don't have an answer to that question, though I think that some of it has to do with the way in which the system is managed by carrot and stick. This place is a carrot. The system needs Wandsworth to operate as the stick.
Do any of the POA representatives have any contribution to make on this issue?
Paul Parfitt, branch chairman of the POA at Long Lartin. I'd like to endorse some of the things that Stan Thompson's saying about the relationships at Long Lartin. Could I say why other places are not like Long Lartin? And that is because of people who wear this uniform in other establishments. And the thing at Long Lartin is because of what prison officers have worked and have done here. Let me give you an example of a special delegates conference I attended a few weeks ago over the Wandsworth dispute. I argued there was another way, that prison officers had an obligation similar to a nurse has on in a ward, and that is you do not walk off that landing, because if we do, what do we do to the people that we're in charge of and looking after? I can assure you that did not receive a standing ovation. What I would like to see, and this may be condemned here, is that within 5 years we replace all probation officers in prison, and that role taken on by prison officers, people who are caring and understanding. That's where we, as a local association, wish to progress. That's where we hope that we have the support of people like you on the top table.
Why can't prisoners replace the probation service? You see, what we do is that we reinforce a helplessness in prisoners. They're not capable of doing anything.
I'd like to know their view on prison wages. As we all know, they're very low. Surely it would be better if prisoners were given a decent industrial wage, and that 1/3, say, goes to inmates' wages, 1/3 goes to either their family or victims according to their conscience, and the last third goes to savings, so that when an inmate is released, he'll have a lump sum to take with him, so he won't have to commit crime in order to live.
I've been through the system myself, and my job is to come into prisons and to help people when they come out. But what about before they come out? How much help is being given to prisoners? I'm talking about the long-term prisoners now, who in actual fact spend years in prison. How much help is being given them to actually be rehabilitated to come out?
It's not in a way for me to answer. I think you've already heard some of the answers that the prisoners themselves are giving to that question, that for most people going through the prison system at the moment is, if anything, a negative experience. You end up worse rather than better, and the amount of help that's available to you is very, very limited.
I'd like to raise the question of Rule 1074, which is basically a 28-day laydown. Prisoners moved without prior warning to another prison segregation unit outside the dispersal system, often for periods in excess of 28 days. It's normal procedure for a prisoner to find himself further 100 miles or more further away from his family. The prisoner has little or no personal belongings, spends up to 24 hours a day locked in solitary confinement, and is often subjected to brutal intimidation. Rarely is the prisoner made aware of why he's on Rule 1074. No charges need to be brought against the prisoner to bring Rule 1074 into effect. And the question I'd like to ask is, if, as is stated, this is not a punishment, could the speakers please tell us what it is?
I totally agree with you on that. relation to what you're saying, and the issue I've tried to put forward in the special unit, but there was nothing resolved by taking people away from the situation. The only way people would learn is to keep them there and to work with them through it.
The talk was of reform, but it was clear where the power really lay. The morning session had to end at 11 o'clock to fit prison routine. Prisoners went off to lunch and then to be banged up in their cells till 2 o'clock. The forum could only resume when inmates went back to work. In the workshop, one inmate took the chance to highlight his grievances.
I think the possibilities of an explosion in a prison like this is present at any time, and it's one that I'm always concerned about. The restrictions after Gartree haven't helped. And indeed, because of a number of problems in the prison, such as the amount of drugs that are getting into the prison, there may indeed be more restrictions. I'm trying to hold that off. If I get a response from the prisoners, which indicates that the level of drugs is very low, then maybe I won't have to do what I think, as a governor, I've got to do, which is to control the level of both hard and soft drugs coming into the prison.
But what you're talking about is actually negotiating with your inmates.
Negotiating, I think that's a term that I wouldn't disagree with.
If I misbehave in here, let's see, I can go to the block, segregation unit. At the end of the day, they can cite good order and discipline, which is a catch-all which covers everything. If I swear at the wrong screw in the wrong manner, if I tell them to fuck off, I can lose 7 days remission for that. I couldn't imagine anybody outside having 7 days imprisonment for telling somebody to do that thing.
One of the most serious punishments is being put on Rule 43, in segregation or solitary confinement. The segregation unit has 20 cells. The bleakest is a strong box, a cell within a cell where the bed is a concrete slab. Prisoners are stripped, searched and observed, from the side and from above. In 1987 in British prisons, 1,406 men were put in such cells, and 74 in body belts, a modern form of straitjacket. For some, freedom is even more of an issue than complaints about discipline. After 15 years inside, John Walker of the Birmingham Six still has faith he will be freed.
Yeah, we'll get out, if the British government tell the truth. I can go home tomorrow. This gentleman can go home tomorrow, because they know we never done this. They know we never done this. They're holding us. They have made us political. Nobody wants to know the truth. If they want the truth, give us a truth drug.
The fact remains is that they are never going to give in if they convict anybody. They're never going to be made, they don't want to be made wrong. And that's just simply how it is, you know what I mean?
The long gap in the day allowed visitors to take stock of what the morning revealed about conditions at Long Lartin and whether they encouraged reform.
It's not really getting to the real issue, and that is the them and us between prison officers and prisoners, trying to break down the sort of anti-authority thing, trying to build up confidence in prisoners, trying to get them to challenge their own attitudes. This sort of environment has got to make space for that degree of change. It's not overnight change, but unless the prison system tackles it, nobody else can. And I think that here, in this prison, there is definitely the ingredients for that to happen. It's now up to the prisoners themselves, because they're the main force of change. They've got to make the personal choices.
When I was inside, I was a right rebel, because I was full of bitterness and hatred, you know, but I had to face myself. And I can speak from experience, the only time I made any progress was when I looked inward as to why I was in prison. And taking that responsibility of the extent of my crime, it's partly, I suppose, remorse, you know, because if you don't face it, you can't be really very remorseful. And from there, I did progress. I stopped hitting out at staff. I was terribly violent. I stopped hitting out at staff, and things went on better from there.
In the afternoon, inmates returned, and the forum split into 12 working groups to consider issues raised, such as the lack of trust, the lie-down, and preparation for release. We filmed 2 of these groups, each chaired by a prisoner.
Kevin Rawlings, I'm doing 9 years for importation of drugs.
Michael Keogh, serving 14 years. I've served 8.5 years for robbery so far.
Errol Henry, I'm serving 18 years for rape. I've served 2 years so far.
Stephen Saunders, serving 8 years for armed robbery.
Joe Whittier, Governor of Long Lartin.
Diana Ruthven, Prison Reform Trust.
Todd Hogan, Senior Psychologist at Long Lartin.
Martin Kelly, 10 years, firearms kidnapping.
Ivan Whitehouse, 12 years, armed robbery.
Arthur Southern, Prison Officer, Long Lartin.
Jeff Cheaton, 10 years, conspiracy.
Janet Harbour, prison visitor, Long Lartin.
Alan Bannerman, life, murder.
I think one of the things that came through this morning, well, it came through to me anyway, was that it's not often that we're portrayed as people. And this is one of the few times that we have a chance to do that. So I would hope that everybody acts sensibly and takes the opportunity to make something of this. Has anybody got any questions they particularly want to address to anyone?
See, Mr. Whitty, how can you trust a prison officer when he calls you for classes and you end up in a body belt going out of the prison? Where are you going to make the trust there?
It's no different than the fact that people can trust me, but I might be taking 28 days remission off them tomorrow.
The thing is, until we have some sort of say, some sort of a group that can actually sit down and discuss these sort of problems with you on a regular basis, that sort of trust or continuous can't be gained.
I think the point is, who's going to make the first move? It's up to you people to make the moves. We're just prisoners. We've got no rights in prison. It's for you to dictate the terms. It's for you to say how we move ahead.
And unless we get some sort of representation with you and through you, there's no way our voice can be heard in any way or form.
I come to this prison in January, the end of January. 42-day lie-down. I was only out for 28 days. I come to this prison. I have a lie-down. I was in your wing, Governor. What, can you tell me what I was put on a lie-down for?
From management's point of view, it is a means of keeping the wings at a reasonable temperature. There are times when we do feel that for whatever reason the balance on a wing is wrong, and we need a means of altering the balance to keep the wing in a state of equilibrium. And Tenor 74 is a means of doing that. I wouldn't expect you to agree with me on that point, but that is why it's there and that is why it's used.
I mean, basically, it's sowing the seeds of discontent. That's giving them no hope, no trust in the system.
If there were no Tenor 74, no lie down, and we had a situation in Long Lartin where we felt that on a particular wing, a group of inmates were generally misbehaving and making life difficult for the other inmates, how would you suggest that we deal with that problem?
You've got adequate segregation units where you can carry out, you know, anything that you feel may need to be carried out on any particular case. You know, if you feel that somebody's being disruptive, why can't you take them down the block, investigate that case, and go from there? Bring charges if there need be, or whatever.
I'm a member of the Board of Visitors, and so I stand outside the prisons to some degree, looking in on the organisation. And it does seem rather strange to me that we're not involved in the 1074 decision. It's an instrument of control. I take, as the Governor says, they use it as an instrument of control of the discipline within the prison. Now, other instruments of control, like Rule 43, we have to monitor and have to endorse within 24 hours. I particularly do a lot of these endorsements and I investigate them closely. I think time has come when 1074 isn't an autocratic instrument of control. It's one where it should be monitored as it is anywhere else. And I think then we wouldn't particularly have an investigation in any depth. But somebody from outside would be asking the questions that the inmate is not getting the answers to.
Rule 74 has been used for prisoners that have protested. And it's been used as recently as a month ago when there was complaints about the food. Several prisoners were shanghaied, as we say. And the Governor issued a letter to all wings saying that he was trying to improve the food. but enough was enough. In other words, no more complaining. And if there was, they'd be moved out, and they were moved out.
I had a lot of contact with John Bowden, initially settling him down, initially getting his trust, which he didn't trust anybody, and to a degree he still distrusts prison staff.
Do you expect him to trust you? When you shout him for classes, then put him in a body belt and carry him out?
Yes. No, just let me answer that. You say he was put into a body belt and carried out. The reason he was put into a body belt was because he head-butted a senior officer.
What do you expect a man to do when he comes down for gym and he walks around the corner down there and there's about 20 screws pounce on him and say, come on, John, you're going?
Nobody pounced on him. He was asked to go down.
It's a known fact a man in prison is unstable. How do you handle that? With a body belt? Or plenty of jollop?
He'd only gone out on a lie down and he was coming back into this prison until he head-butted that senior officer. He is the only one that is stopping himself coming back here. Nobody else. The control that we have got, we've lost for the time being. Whether we get it back with him or not is another matter.
Let's just say, the first thing you said, the control that we've got, not the trust or the control.
It's the same thing.
So everything seems to come down to pure control.
No, it's not. Maybe a bad choice of words then. The trust that you build up, you'll only get that with talking people, like we're talking now, and that you're talking and saying you want him with the governor. That's the only way we're going to go forward. That is how I went forward with Bowden.
My probable date of release is 2003. There's no such thing as rehabilitation in the system, Jimmy. That's for the individual. You seek that yourself and find that yourself. The machine won't let you find that. I pulled the governor here, Mr. Joe Whitty, 3 times and asked him for my date, and 3 times I've been pushed to the side. I pulled the Lifers governor, Mr. Jerry Petrick. Can't get to see him. The new man, I can't get to see him. Now I have to visit my people. They have to come and see me. I've got nothing to tell my little mother, my little father. The man who I killed, I've got a conscience for that. But my people don't have to suffer. Wakefield, Guthrie, Long Lartin. Why am I getting other big ship-outs all around the country? I live in Norfolk. I live in East Anglia. I'm stuck up here again? No. The system is there to alienate you.
You've raised something which I feel is quite important in terms of the tremendously long time you're having to go look ahead to, or trying to block out. And on the one hand, it's no hope, but you've really got to say to yourself, in my book, because I had to say that to myself, I had to really bite the bullet and say to myself, right, I'm going to have to do this, and it's how I say, right, here's another, just say 10, 15 years to go. I've somehow got to make this time work for me. And what you've got to do is just the same way as people do in university. University is a time out for people, largely to think and to develop skills. And really what you can say to yourself, I can make this work for me, I can make it work against me. But don't think that you don't have power in what's going on here. You've got to say, hold it a second, pal. Keep putting the pressure on people at the governor, put pressure on the staff. Here's what I want, here's what we want to be a part of this debate. We want to have some say in our futures.
I actually petitioned to the Home Secretary about coming off Cat A, coming out of solitary confinement my last 12 months, and it was all blanked. I wanted to come off Cat A. I asked to go to a hostel because I didn't want to come back to prison. Now, my old dad picked me up outside Gartree Prison in Leicestershire, and I was released as a Category 8 prisoner. So I wasn't given any form of rehabilitation whatsoever, such as I had no home leave, no parole, no nothing. Now, on the way home, me dad pulled into the cafe on the motorway. Now, I wasn't properly ready for mixing with people. Now, I went to the toilet, and there was about 7 or 8 people in the toilet, geezers. Now, I was convinced that them people in that toilet was waiting for me.
Paranoia?
Well, I don't know about paranoid then, but I felt that they was waiting for me. Put it in a nutshell, I was ill prepared to go out. I wasn't I wasn't ready for the people, you know. And I lasted 10 weeks and I'm back in again.
It doesn't matter what I say to you or how I try to convince you, I'm not going to go anywhere or get anything. And when I ask when my first parole is knocked back, why it was knocked back, I'm told that's a secret. But only I can reform myself, but I can't be told how or when I can reform myself. Now that to me seems very, very strange.
I accept that, and it is something that somehow we have got to alter.
We're asking for the possibility of forming an informal group if necessary, but anything that will get our attitudes, ideas, fears, longings, whatever you want to call them, over to the man who runs the prison. And our unhappinesses, disappointments, the lot. It all needs to be brought out, discussed round a table between the staff and the inmates. It's no good the staff talking about the inmates and the inmates talking about the staff. We have to get together and talk about it together.
That is perfectly all right until I have to say, no, you can't, or no, you can't have. Then I think is where the power game's in, because people then say, well, why can't we? Well, we want to. We want to push the barriers out. We want to do this. And that is when, from a prison point of view, we get into very serious problems of control.
Then everyone reconvened for the group chairman to report back.
Prison itself for a protracted period is an abnormal experience. It separates people from reality, degrades them and brutalises, then spews them out into society again with nothing to show except bitterness, loss of dignity and self-respect. Far from rehabilitating prisoners, it leaves the majority of them marked for life emotionally, breaks up marriages and causes distress by punishing family members as well as the offender.
The day had made inmates aware of more than just their own grievances.
By Mary Whitty about the prisoners, about the victims. Victims were invited here for this debate. They declined to appear. But I can assure Mary Whitty that most victims are on the prisoner's conscience of a night time.
If there's going to be any change, any reform in prison, it has to come from the authorities, because prisoners haven't got the power to do it. But if the prisoners want to force change, it's no good climbing on roofs, tearing up, whatever, because all you're doing is playing into their hands. You've got to do it a sensible way, in that you get yourself organised, you hold meetings like this, and you talk about it, and you make people aware of your circumstances and exactly what is happening in prisons. Thank you.
Joe Whitty had the last word. He voiced conventional thanks to inmates and visitors, but his final point was to stress where in a prison real control lay.
More than anybody else probably in this prison, I wanted John Bowden to be here today. But at the end of the day, again, unlike some observers, I have to make decisions for the good of the institution. And that was the decision that I made. I wasn't pressurized, and the Home Office know nothing about it, by the Home Office, nor by the staff, nor by the local branch. It was made solely and personally by me. I decided enough was enough, and he had to go.
The session ended at 4 p.m. The prison day is a cycle of work, food, bang-up. Inmates had to return to their cells till 6 o'clock, so we had to wait till then to ask if they had been convinced by the demand they take on responsibility. They accepted it, perhaps too easily.
Yeah, I'd be prepared to carry responsibility, and I've got to do something with my life. As the rest of my life I'm in these sort of places, I've got to live in these places. It's either that or take the pill.
I think the majority of us do know why we're wrong, why we're here, and we do realise that it's wrong, but we very, very seldom get the chance to put it right. And by the time we leave prison after being here years, bitterness creeps in and the situation doesn't get help.
More prisoners than people realise take responsibility for their actions. They're in here every day, and they're reminded of why they are in here. It's simply through their crime that they're in here. There's no need to remind these fellas. They know. All of us know.